Hello TACACS.net users, I'm Cameron and I'm going to show you how to get a TACACS.net server up and running with a basic configuration in just a few minutes. For this demonstration, I'll be referring to our Quick Start guide, which can be found on our website. I'll also be using the latest release, which is an advanced version of TACACS.net, so if you're using the free version, your files and configuration will differ slightly. If you'd like a more in-depth, individualized install, we offer professional remote installation services where we walk you through the installation, show you the configuration options, answer questions, and give you some tips and tricks to optimize your deployment. So with that, let's head over to our lab and get started. Alright, so I'm over here in our lab, and before I get to the installation, I'm going to configure my client device, which is a Cisco router for TACACS Plus with local failover by copying and pasting the configuration from the example in our knowledge base. Note that I have already set the IP address and shared secret for our TACACS.net server in the router. Now I will log out and back in just to demonstrate that we are able to access the router with the applied AAA configuration. Great. And now we have our client device set and configured for TACACS Plus authentication. Alright, so we're back here in our lab and I've downloaded the TACACS.net installer to my desktop. I'll go ahead and launch it and follow the prompts. Here is where you enter the shared secret that will be used between the server and the clients. And for simplicity's sake, I'm going to be using secret, but you can use whatever you want and can change it any time after the installation as well. Okay, now that our TACACS.net server is installed, I'll open up the configuration files, and we use Notepad++, but you can use any text editor you prefer. I'm also going to open a command prompt and the terminal window that I'll be using to connect to our client device. Now, something I want to mention here is that a full TACACS.net configuration includes multiple files, but we'll only be focusing on two of them, the Authentication and Authorization files. And the reason for that is that TACACS.net comes pre-configured with basic functionality so that you can get up and running quickly with minimal configuration. Of course, the more complex your deployment, the more involved the configuration will be, but for our purposes, we only need these two files to get started. And starting with the authentication.xml configuration file, which is the file where you define users and user groups that will authenticate via TACACS Plus, I'm going to focus in on a pair of pre-configured local file users here. Note that in addition to local file users, we have multiple user authentication stores available, such as Active Directory, LDAP, and Radius. Also notice the name of the user group. This is the name that will correspond to a matching authorization profile in our authorization file. You can name this group anything you want, but it's best if it's a name relevant to the type of users that belong to it, and I'll leave the default at network engineering. Now I'll remove the comments from the user group section, and I only want to have user 1 available for testing, so I'll go ahead and comment out user 2, making sure to leave the opening and closing users tags intact and uncommented. I'll also change the password for this user to something easier to type over and over again, like pass. Be sure to save the file, and that's it for our test user, user 1. Now I'm going to switch over to the authorization file, and I'm going to make this a read-write group and user 1 a read-write user, but first I want to point out the containers towards the top of the file. We have user groups and client groups, and in the user groups container is where you want to match the name from the user group that I highlighted from the authentication file. That will correlate this authorization profile to that specific user authentication group. Also note the client groups container. This corresponds to a specific group of clients that can be defined in a variety of ways. It's best to start with IP addresses, but you can also use host names and regular expressions as well. The files come with two client groups pre-configured. the local host group, which is the address of the local machine and needed so you can run TAC test commands from the server, and the internal group, which is all of the RFC 1918 private IP address ranges. Now I'm going to assign user 1 read-write privileges. By default, this is set to show commands to implement least privilege, and all I need to do is go to the permit element in the shell container and change the value from show.star to just .star. This says to allow all commands. The file is read from top to bottom like an ACL with an implied deny at the end, but I'm going to leave the deny statement for demonstration purposes. Now we save the file, and that's it. User 1 is configured to access our client with administrator level privileges. Now to test that our configuration is correct and functional, I'm going to use a couple of tools that come with the TACACS.NET server. The first is a tool called TACVerify, and TACVerify is used to check for syntax errors we may have made with our files. And that is simply executed from a command prompt by issuing the TACVerify command. And we receive a message that our files are error-free and have the correct syntax. So now that we've configured our server, I'm going to validate our configuration for user 1 using another TACACS.NET tool called TACTest. And TACTest is a TACACS Plus client that runs on the local server. When issuing the TACTest command with the question mark flag, TACTest will provide examples for authentication, authorization, and accounting tests. So I'm going to test the authentication example first. And here I've entered our user 1 credentials, and we are told that user 1 has been authenticated with a successful result. I'm also going to check user 1's privileges by running TACTest with an authorization example. So here I'll just use the configure terminal command. And there TACTest tells us that user 1 is indeed allowed to issue the configure terminal command on this client. But I want to be really sure our configuration is correct. So I'll go back to the router terminal and try to log in with our user 1 credentials again. And we see user 1 is granted access to the router, and we have confirmation that our TACACS.NET authentication is working. Now when I elevate user 1's privileges and issue the configure terminal command, user 1 is now in global configuration mode. Alright, so there you have it. A quick walkthrough of how simple it is to get the TACACS.NET TACACS Plus server up and running. I hope you enjoyed this demonstration. As a reminder, if you would like a full professional one-on-one remote installation where we walk you through step-by-step with tips and tricks and answer questions about TACACS.NET and your deployment, get in touch with your sales advisor about our remote installation service. Thanks for watching.